What if the version of you that wakes up every day isn't actually you? You open your eyes, stretch, look around. Everything seems familiar. Your reflection still smiles back from the mirror. You reply to the usual messages, check your to-do list, drink your coffee. And yet, there's this strange feeling lingering in the silence between moments, a whisper you try to ignore. This isn't who I really am. What if you've spent your whole life learning how to be accepted, not how to be yourself? From childhood, you were taught to behave, to shrink, to smile when it hurt, to hold back tears, to keep the peace. You weren't taught how to express yourself. You were trained to be digestible, agreeable, presentable. You became what others could handle. But in the process, you lost touch with who you actually are, that heaviness in your chest every morning. That's not depression. That's a soul suffocating under layers of survival. It's not that you're weak. It's that your entire identity has been built on avoiding rejection. Every part of your personality, your kindness, your ambition, your strength, may have been shaped by fear, not by freedom. But here's the truth nobody talks about: you don't have to keep playing that role. And once you stop performing, something incredible begins to happen. Not loudly, not instantly, but quietly. You begin to feel real. Are you brave enough to meet the version of yourself that doesn't need to perform? Let's find out. Most people don't realize it, but they're not living as themselves. They're living as a version of who they were told to be. From the outside, it looks like life is in motion. Work, goals, conversations, smiles, achievements. But beneath the surface, something's missing. Not in a loud or obvious way, just a subtle, persistent ache. Like wearing clothes that almost fit but never quite feel right. Like playing a song that's beautiful, but not yours. What if the way you laugh, the way you speak, the way you move through the world, what if all of it was a response to fear? Fear of not being liked, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being too much or not enough, so instead of becoming, you started performing. You started editing yourself. You played roles, the strong one, the polite one, the selfless one. You learned how to survive, but in the process, you forgot how to be free. And here's the hardest part. When performance becomes identity, silence becomes terrifying. Because in silence, there's no script, no one to impress, just you and a truth you've spent years trying not to hear. But what if that truth isn't scary? What if underneath the masks and roles, there's a version of you that's not broken or weak, but simply buried? What if your sadness isn't a flaw to fix, but a signal you've been gone from yourself too long? This isn't about becoming someone new. This is about remembering someone ancient, the you that existed before the world told you who to be. And maybe, just maybe, that version of you is ready to come back. Before you ever had the chance to define who you were, the world started doing it for you. When you were a child, you absorbed everything like a sponge, not just words, but tones. A voice, reactions, silences. You learned quickly which parts of you brought love and which ones brought discomfort. You didn't need anyone to tell you to smile more, be quieter, try harder. You just knew. You could feel it in the way people looked at you, the way their attention shifted, the way your emotions were sometimes too much. So you adapted. You adjusted the volume on your voice. You smoothed your edges. You studied the room before you entered it. You became someone who could survive, not by being authentic, but by being acceptable. And it worked, didn't it? You were praised for being so mature, so helpful, and so polite. You started to associate worth with how much space you didn't take up, how many needs you could suppress, how much discomfort you could tolerate without speaking up. But here's the part no one tells you. Every adaptation has a cost. The more you shaped yourself to be loved, the further you drifted from the version of you that never needed to earn love. In the first place, that version, the real you, began to fade, buried under layers of coping. And now, years later, you don't even realize you're still wearing the costume. You just call it your personality. But deep down, something feels off. You struggle to rest without guilt. You overthink simple decisions. You replay conversations long after they're over, wondering if you said too much or not enough. You shrink your voice around certain people. You smile when you're dying inside. You say, "I'm fine" so often that even you've started believing it. You've built an identity around control, not because you're manipulative, but because control feels safer than chaos. And somewhere along the way, authenticity became a risk you couldn't afford to take. You want to speak freely, but your throat tightens. You want to rest, but your mind won't stop. You want to be seen, but you fear what might be revealed. And here's the quiet tragedy. Most people around you don't even notice. They love the version of you that's easy to love, the agreeable one, the achiever, the helper. They've never met the one underneath. Maybe you haven't either. You see, we don't just hide from the world. We start hiding from ourselves. We bury our anger because it might scare people. We suppress our sadness because it feels dramatic. We laugh in rooms that drain us just to keep the peace, and we call that strength, but it's not strength. It's exhaustion with a smile on it, and over time this performance becomes your baseline. You don't even realize you're acting anymore. You're just tired all the time. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Deep in your bones, you crave silence, but when it comes, it's loud. It reminds you of everything you've been avoiding. You crave connection, but you don't know how to offer your truth when you've hidden it for so long. You crave freedom, but you don't know how to take off the mask without losing the life you've built around it. Here's the truth. The life you built to survive may not be the life that will allow you to fully live, and that realization, it's terrifying, because it means letting go of everything familiar, everything safe. It means you may disappoint people, you may be misunderstood, you may lose relationships that only loved the edited version of you, but it also means this. You could finally breathe. You could finally rest without permission. You could finally speak. And not apologize for the sound of your own truth. You've spent so long protecting yourself from pain that you've accidentally built walls against joy too. And now you stand at the edge of something new, not because you've figured it all out, but because you're starting to ask the only question that truly matters: who am I when I'm not performing anymore? That's where the journey begins. Not with answers, not with a better version of yourself, but with the courage to stop pretending, not because you're broken, but because you're ready to be whole. There's a moment, quiet, subtle, when you realize that you're exhausted not from life, but from pretending. You move through the day doing everything right. You answer politely. You smile when expected. You agree to avoid conflict. You check off every task. You maintain appearances. From the outside, you're doing well, but inside it feels like you're watching someone else live your life. Like you're playing a role in a story you don't remember choosing. This isn't just emotional fatigue, it's soul weariness. A slow, invisible drain from living as someone you're not every single day. You see, most people think pretending is loud, putting on a show, being fake, performing for attention. But real pretending is silent. It's a nervous laugh you practice before someone finishes their sentence. It's saying yes while your gut screams no. It's making yourself smaller in rooms that feel too sharp. It's managing your tone, your expression, your energy, constantly. And the scariest part, you're good at it. So good that you don't even notice anymore. You've become so attuned to what people want, to what makes others comfortable, that you've forgotten how to make yourself feel safe. You've confused emotional safety with self-erasure. You call it kindness. You call it being a good person. But sometimes it's just a form of hiding, and you learned it for a reason. At some point, being fully yourself became unsafe. Maybe you were too loud, too sensitive, too opinionated, too honest, and the world didn't respond with kindness. Maybe you were punished for being expressive, ignored for being vulnerable. Maybe love was conditional, so you adapted. You gave them what they could handle. You wore masks that made you easier to accept. You built walls to protect the parts of you that no one held gently. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. That's your nervous system doing its job. Survive first, heal later. But here's where the tension begins. You're not in danger anymore, but the role you created to survive is still running the show. That's why you feel split. One part of you craves peace, rest, authenticity. Another part keeps scanning the room, adjusting your tone, doubting your feelings. You want to relax, but your body is still rehearsing for a threat that no longer exists. You want to slow down, but guilt rushes in. You want to speak up, but your voice catches. You want to feel joy, but your nervous system doesn't recognize it as safe. This is what happens when your identity is built around defense. Every emotion is filtered. Every interaction is monitored. Every decision is second-guessed. You don't live. You manage. And the more you try to fix yourself, the worse it gets. Because you're trying to fix a mask, not a wound. You're editing the persona, not healing the soul. The truth is, you don't need more discipline. You need permission to be human, raw, imperfect, real. But most people never get there. They spend years building the ideal self, successful, spiritual, productive, selfless. And when the anxiety doesn't go away, they assume they need to work harder. Meditate more, journal more, hustle for healing. But the peace they're chasing isn't found in another self-help ritual. It's found in dropping the performance. It's not easy. Because when you stop performing, the silence comes, and silence is where the truth lives. In that silence, you realize how many of your choices weren't choices at all. They were reactions. You chose the career that made your parents proud. You said yes to the relationship because being alone felt scarier than being unseen. You stayed busy because stillness made your sadness louder. You became a giver because receiving made you feel vulnerable. Your whole life, you've been trying to prove something, that you're enough, that you're good, that you're lovable. But here's the paradox. The more you try to prove your worth, the further you drift from the part of you that never needed to prove anything in the first place, the part that was always enough, always worthy, just buried. Buried under pressure, buried under fear, buried under shoulds. But what if you stopped? Stopped trying to be impressive. Stopped explaining your feelings to people who never asked. Stopped making yourself small so others wouldn't feel insecure. Stopped calling your trauma growth. What would be left? Not perfection, not clarity, but presence. You'd begin to feel your body again, not as a machine for performance, but as a home. You'd feel your breath, not shallow and anxious, but steady. You'd cry without narrating your pain. You'd laugh, really laugh, not because it's polite, but because something actually moved you. You wouldn't be better. You'd just be honest. And in a world obsessed with image, that honesty is revolutionary. At first, letting go feels like loss. You've spent so long curating your identity, piece by piece, moment by moment, that removing even one part of it feels like pulling a thread from a tightly woven fabric. What will be left when the costume falls? What will remain when the applause fades and the spotlight turns off? Silence. But silence, though uncomfortable, is not emptiness. It's space. And space is sacred. For the first time, you're not trying to impress, fix, or prove. You're just still. And in that stillness, something strange happens. You begin to notice things you never had the capacity to feel before, like the way sunlight filters through your window, the way your breath lands fully in your chest, the way your body reacts when you're around certain people, not in performance, but in truth. You're not analyzing everything anymore. You're listening, and in that listening, you begin to hear yourself. Not the edited version, not the polite version. The original voice, the one that never needed to be perfect to be real. It starts small. You cancel a plan when you're tired and don't explain. You say no without cushioning it with guilt. You feel anger and don't rush to disguise it as compassion. You cry in the middle of the day and let it move through you without shame, and maybe for the first time, you feel free. Not because you're healed, not because you've achieved some enlightened state, but because you've stopped negotiating your right to exist as you are. This kind of freedom doesn't come with fireworks or grand announcements. It comes quietly, like breath returning after years of holding it in. But that quiet, it's powerful. Because now you're not just existing, you're inhabiting. You're showing up to your own life not as a curated version of yourself, but as someone grounded, raw, and unfiltered. And yes, at first it feels lonely. The people who loved your mask may not know how to love your truth. You're not as agreeable, not as available, not as easy to digest. You take up more space, you speak from your gut, you hold your boundaries, you stop smoothing over tension just to keep things peaceful. but that peace you were keeping. It was often a prison. It was costing you your voice, your needs, your presence, and now you're choosing something different. Not because it's easy, but because it's honest. You begin to notice the difference between connections that required your performance and those that allow your presence. You stop initiating conversations just to avoid being forgotten. You stop laughing at jokes that aren't funny. You stop pretending to care about things that drain you, and for a while you may stand alone. But in that solitude, you begin to meet someone extraordinary, yourself. You start realizing how much of your life was structured around protecting others from your truth. How often you stayed silent just to keep the peace. How often you dimmed your joy, your anger, your aliveness, just to avoid discomfort. That awareness hurts, but it also sets you free, because now you have a choice. You can keep watering the false self, the anxious, hypervigilant, people-pleasing version that earned love by disappearing. Or you can start nurturing the quiet, present, unshakable version that doesn't need to earn anything. The one who already is enough. This isn't about abandoning your life. It's about inhabiting it fully. It's about living from the inside out, not the outside in. Making decisions from alignment, not fear. Choosing rest without shame. Feeling deeply without apologizing. Existing without editing. You're no longer living by reaction. You're living by resonance. And something beautiful starts to happen. When you live like that, you attract differently. Not just people, but experiences, opportunities, clarity. Because life doesn't respond to who you're pretending to be. It responds to who you actually are. No one tells you this, but authenticity is disruptive. It shakes loose everything that was built on your silence. It brings grief. Grief for the years you lost pretending. Grief for the connections that only knew your mask. Grief for the self that never got to breathe. But that grief, it clears the path because underneath it all, you were never broken. You were just buried. And now you're finally starting to remember. When you stop performing, the world doesn't suddenly become gentler. In fact, at first things get more uncomfortable. You feel exposed, raw, like walking barefoot on unfamiliar ground. Without your usual defenses, everything feels more intense. The silence louder, the pauses longer, the emotions sharper. The world hasn't changed, you have. And that changes everything. You no longer move through life like a chameleon, adapting your colors to match the room. You stop shrinking your voice to protect fragile egos. You stop smiling when you're breaking inside. You stop making yourself palatable just to avoid rejection. You start showing up as you are, not as who you think people want you to be. And at first, that costs you. Some people pull away. They were used to the edited version of you, the agreeable you, the always available, never needy, endlessly accommodating version. Without the mask, you feel unrecognizable, to them and sometimes to yourself. But that space they leave behind, it doesn't stay empty. It becomes sacred. It becomes yours. In that space, something rare begins to grow. Self-trust. Not confidence. Not performance, but trust in your body, your feelings, your voice. You begin to listen inward instead of outsourcing your truth. You check in with yourself before saying yes. You give yourself permission to rest without earning it. You make decisions not to please others, but to honor yourself. And slowly you stop asking the world for permission to be real. You don't need a reason to feel. You don't need a defense for your boundaries. You don't need to justify your no, because your presence becomes enough. You begin to notice how your nervous system calms in certain spaces and tenses in others. You stop overriding those signals just to be polite. You leave rooms that make you feel small. You stop chasing closure where silence has already spoken. You honor your energy like it's sacred, because now you know it is. And with this new presence, something remarkable happens. Your relationships change, not because you force them to, but because you're no longer participating in dynamics that require your absence. You no longer reach out just to keep things smooth. You no longer explain your emotions to people who don't know how to hold them. You no longer abandon your truth to preserve someone else's comfort. And yes, some relationships fade, but the ones that remain or arrive feel different. There's No performance, no pretending. Just truth, just breath, just space to be. You stop needing to prove your worth. You stop calculating your value. You stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, do I feel safe here? You become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. You start choosing people who see you not just when you're polished, but when you're honest. Because you've discovered something essential. The real you is not too much. She's just unfamiliar. And you're finally learning to reintroduce her to the world. You're no longer chasing healing like it's a race. You're not looking for a new you to perform. You're not seeking spiritual aesthetics to hide behind. You're practicing presence. You're staying when it's uncomfortable. You're breathing through your truth. You're letting your body guide your pace. You're choosing rest over productivity. And most of all, you're letting life be simple again. Simple doesn't mean easy. It means honest. It means no longer carrying stories that aren't yours. It means saying I don't know without shame. It means letting go of urgency and letting in breath. Your time becomes yours again, not just hours on a clock, but attention, intention, stillness. You reclaim the pieces of you that were scattered in other people's approval. You become a sanctuary for your own spirit. And that's when life begins to respond differently. You start attracting people who recognize your energy, not your performance. Opportunities that align with your truth, not just your skills. Moments that feel spacious, not scripted. You stop hustling for clarity and start trusting your resonance. And maybe for the first time in years, you feel safe in your own skin. Not because everything's perfect, but because you've stopped